Welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We have a special guest. Oh, as always, we have Chris. Say hello, Chris.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome to be here.
Well, thanks, Dan.
And then we have a returning guest, Ryan. You have been here once before, right?
That's correct.
You were here for The Fountain.
Yes.
Which was a tough movie to talk about, I feel like.
This one will be easier, yes.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
They share a producer, I found out.
Do they? I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I did not do my notes very well this time. So
the Scottish Ian Smith produced both of these films.
And of course, we're talking about 2006's Children of Men, the dystopia film that came out during Christmas this season in 2006, and I made my parents go and see it. I had seen it once, and I was floored by it. I thought it was one of the greatest films I've ever seen in my life. And then I forced my parents to see it, and their reaction was, meh, that was sad. And so that's kind of what I got out of them. How'd you guys come across this film? Did you guys see it when it came out?
Yeah, I saw it. I don't know about opening weekend, but pretty close. I was trying to figure out how the hell did we get like buzz about movies in 2006? Maybe was it just simply like, I mean, it's a Universal distributed film, so it's wide release, even though I feel like it has some kind of indie cred weirdly somehow. Maybe because even though Cuarón, the director, just had done the Harry Potter movie, he had been kind of buzzy because of Y Tu Mamá También. But also I think just like I feel like our friend group, for whatever reason, it's kind of hard to see in retrospect, into Clive Owen. Like,
because of Closer. We had a big inside joke about Closer. Closer,
yeah.
not Closer. Wait, is it Closer?
The Closer. Yeah, and also like I remember seeing Croupier in the theater with my brother back in the
I don't even know what
late
that is.
90s. That's like Clive Owen's breakout movie.
Yeah.
I like Croupier. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good flick. But I don't know. What about you, Ryan?
I probably friend group because I had just moved to Los Angeles, and then I lived pretty close to the Cinerama Dome, and so we got all the movies kind of coming in there at a steady clip, and it was not as easy to ignore stuff. And a lot of my friends were aspiring filmmakers and actors and things like that, and so they kind of it was on, because it was a technical achievement at the time. Everybody kind of there was some hype surrounding it there, and so I think that's kind of how it came across my radar.
I do remember the technical achievement part being the biggest part of the buzz.
Yeah,
it was sort of like the one shot and I don't know. I think that how did we figure out? I don't even know how I figured out about this film at all. I was at grad school. I don't know who knew about this movie. How did you? The internet, I guess. I mean, Reddit was a thing back then, wasn't it?
No, that was Tumblr. For me, anyways.
Reddit was around 2006, 2007. So
really,
yeah.
I was not on it.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
still not on it though.
But a lot of it's word of mouth. You know, you have like friends that are into film, and it plays at like Sundance or whatever, and it just gets through the grapevine. It is kind of mind blowing compared to now, where if a movie like this came out, the first trailer would be like have 1 million hits within 24 hours, even though it's kind of like an art film.
You'll probably get into this, but I was actually surprised when I looked at the notes for this one, the box office for this, and I don't think that the box office was actually huge. Wiper, do you have anything on?
Yeah, so budget was 76 million, which is high.
Yeah,
for a film like this, like very high. And especially because maybe I'm misreading this, but the production was actually not from a major production studio. Like, do you guys recognize Strike Entertainment and Hit and Run Productions?
No, never heard of it.
No.
Okay, so like that, those are the
Shell
actual
companies.
Yeah, production. It was distributed by Universal, who picked it up. And I think Universal had to greenlight it and stuff like this. But $76 million budget, only did worldwide 70.
That's not a lot at all.
No,
Even
like this thing lost quite a bit of money if you factor in like marketing and stuff.
And I seem to remember the hype, at least when it started getting going and people were starting to see it. And like, again, talking about a lot about the technical aspects of it, it seemed like a lot of people were seeing this movie and would go see it again. It's just like, oh, you have to see this movie. It's such a ride, and you take your friends and you force them to see it again or something like that. It seemed like that kind of movie, but the numbers don't necessarily bear that out.
Well, I think that speaks to what Chris was saying, though, because it's more of a word of mouth film. Yeah, in our worlds, it was like a big deal, but our world was pretty small.
Yeah, I'm finding it out, I guess.
Yeah, like it wasn't like, it was not crossing over to the normies, as
it's
people
also
say.
very bleak, like you said about your parents. Like your parents kind of said, like, well, that was real. That was a real downer,
Yeah,
what a bummer. Yeah.
I think they missed a lot of what was going on there.
Strike Entertainment, some quick cursory Google searching, is the reason that Zack Snyder was able to make Dawn of the Dead in 2004.
Oh, so they were kind of riding high a little bit on this.
Yeah. So
what happened to them?
they started off strong with the Rock's first movie, The Rundown, in 2003, which is it didn't even actually break even, but it was close, and at least it launched that guy's career, acting wise. And then they did the straight to video Bring It On Again, and then somehow they shored up enough money, probably along with whoever Snyder was in bed with at the time, to make Dawn of the Dead. But Children of Men was also the same year they made the huge bomb Let's Go to Prison. Remember that?
That was
Odenkirk movie.
Yeah,
But they also had Slither that year, which became a sleeper hit and also launched, the careers of both James Gunn and Scott Derrickson. So I don't know. It seems like they've been doing a lot. They also did The Thing and RoboCop remakes. So fuck them.
Yeah.
And then Hit and Run Productions was actually a music company.
Oh,
and this was their sort of offshoot. They did like music documentaries.
Okay.
And they did like maybe only 3 motion pictures. 2 in the 90s, and in this movie. This is the last movie they've ever done. Oh, actually, Black Oasis. You guys ever heard of that? Nope.
No. What the fuck is that?
Well,
they're a UK company. So
if the financial performance maybe had something to do with that, then because they made money on this deal.
Yeah. Let's talk about what this movie's about. I'm going to read the plot summary here. In 2027, which is not that far from us, in a chaotic world in which women have become somehow infertile, a former activist agrees to help transport a miraculously pregnant woman to a sanctuary at sea. Kind of spoilery a bit, maybe a bit.
Yeah, a little.
They didn't need to say at sea.
Yeah, at sea's a little stretch there. Tagline for this movie: no children, no future, no hope. But all that can change in a heartbeat.
Is this a pro-life movie? I would say
all that can change
this
with
is a
pro-life
heartbeat movie.
Yeah. I guess we'll talk about that maybe.
that's right. Code for let's not touch that.
Well,
I mean, we gotta the thing about this, and it's hard to, I guess, and I always wanted to contextualize stuff especially for younger people who are listening. This was a big deal for a lot of reasons. One, it's a post 9/11 movie, right? It's explicitly made with a sort of 9/11 haze around it.
War too.
And Iraq War as well. Yeah. I mean, the Iraq War, especially in the War on Terror.
Yeah.
And it's really, if you were politically aware of the news back then, this movie was in your face with it.
They kind of bludgeon you with some of the imagery and themes. Yeah.
And I do wonder if and maybe Chris, you can answer this because you teach film to younger people. Do you think if a 15, 16-year-old saw this, would they get those references?
No, I struggle. We talk about I teach a part of this film mostly for Lubzeki reasons, but then I also teach part of Three Kings.
Okay, sure.
And so everything between Vietnam and 9/11 is just doesn't happen in their minds. Still not covered in social studies, it seems.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 is obviously pretty much taught in a vacuum.
Really?
And so Iraq and Afghanistan, and I also teach 12th grade English. So we read a novel by an Afghani author, and there's just so much absent. There's so much contextualizing that needs to be done for young people to grasp that. And honestly, for me too, like I don't know if I would be as well read in the topic as you are, Dan, that if I, hadn't managed to just like, become a teacher at the time where like that kind of literature and these kinds of films were seen as important. And that was kind of one of the big different takeaways I had with my rewatch of this movie. And I feel like it's more so than some of the other films that we've done on the show, especially lately. Like I watched the one take with my kids every year in school, but then other than that, the full like context of how Iraq War II heavy this film is really just came across to me. I'm curious. Maybe I'm starting to fight. It came across to me as kind of broad and hollow.
Yep.
In my new rewatch.
Wow. Already? We're only like 10 minutes.
I use the term bludgeon. It really bludgeons you with the imagery and says like, hey, remember, hey, this is going
right.
On. Hey,
but without actually saying much, right?
It's everybody is really, and this kind of broadens even to the characterizations. Everybody is pretty ugly in this film and pretty bad and evil. There's like, I mean, aside obviously from our hero, so and his trying to get this person to safety, like
it was ultimately like an avatar.
I mean
himself.
I don't even remember his character's name. It's like
like Med. What is it?
Theo. It's Theo.
But I mean, like, there's a lot of people after these two as they're going through, and they're all just the worst of the worst. They have the government who's, like spitting at people and saying how much he hates immigrants and stuff like that. There's a guard, I think, says that. And then there's the fishes, which is the terrorist group who's, trying to supposedly help immigrants and liberate them and cause this uprising, but they are murderers and killers and backstabbers too. It's just like this world is just the world of the film is just filled with just such ugly humanity. There's very little daylight there, and so I thought it was a little heavy-handed, the way that it was just like not a lot of nuance there. But
yeah, I mean they definitely. Well, it's interesting when he was talking about the movie and how this came to be. Cuarón was basically like after 9/11. I think this like popped up on his radar, or actually before 9/11, and sort of when 9/11 happened, I think he felt a little bit more compelled to make it. The Harry Potter. I was going to say Harry Potter calls him to make a movie. Let's just say that's what happened. And he agreed to do the Harry Potter movie, and this whole movie was put on hold, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in the meantime, that movie comes out 2004,
right?
Iraq War II starts in 2003. By the time you get to 2005. George Bush wins his second election. Again, you cannot view this outside of this vacuum or the sort of that context. Like Bush's second term is way more nihilistic and depressing than the first one. Because when he won in 2004, at the end of 2004 in that election versus John Kerry, it felt like the end of the world. I mean, to me, it did. Little did we know how terrible it could possibly get.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that turning point up because a number of episodes back, we, for whatever reason, it's my fault, we discussed V for Vendetta, which comes out right at the end of Bush's first term, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, now that you say that, that was 2005, this is 2006, like looking at these as two sides of the coin is pretty dour.
Oh yeah, they're intimately connected without a doubt. But one thing I found interesting in sort of listening to you guys talk about, on the second watch, it feels maybe a little broad. There's a shallowness to what's going on. I thought it was quite fascinating that I'm not exactly sure how he came across the novel. So this movie is based on a novel that came out in 1992 called The Children of Men, English novel. It was actually set in this year in 2021. Same idea, mass infertility. He talks a little bit more in depth about the UK and what happens there and depopulation. What I found fascinating about it is that Cuarón refused to read the book.
What the fuck?
Refused to read the book, didn't read it. Him and I think one of the producers, it says here, threw out nearly everything but the character's name, the English setting, the concept that the first pregnancy happened in a barren era, is what they say. So right there, you can already see this as like Cuarón wants a blank canvas for his ideas. The novel and stuff, the story, the structure, it's all sort of gone. And maybe we can relate that back to V for Vendetta. You know, I think they followed the graphic novel by Alan Moore a lot more, but there was a lot of leeway there. Here, this feels like an essay. It almost feels like, and this is going to be insulting and sort of condescending, but I'm going to say it. It does kind of feel like a politics 101 essay from a freshman.
Yeah.
It has that sort of, hey, these are bad people. Hey, there's an uprising. There's nuance in the outlook, but not nuance in the understanding. And it's sort of like I don't know. It's almost like he's throwing everything at the wall that he can emotionally.
That's what I felt like when
there's
throwing it all right at you. All the misery. They're just throwing.
Yeah. But also like thinking that he can get away with it because of like what Lubezki's doing, which is very, both minimal and showy. Like he thinks, I don't know. I that's clearly where I'm at since I've mentioned the guy 3 times already. Yeah, it feels like,
talk about him. Give us some background on this guy.
Right, the cinematographer, nicknamed Chivo, that has been trying to get an Oscar for so long. He was Cuarón's guy. He also worked with Burton, Sleepy Hollow. His shooting on that film is one of the only interesting things about it. He's also worked with Malick on both The New World and Tree of Life. Absolutely beautiful stuff. And he wins for arguably his worst effort, which is 2014's Gravity.
Gravity.
Can we talk about Gravity? I was waiting to talk about Gravity.
That would come out.
Tangent. Oh my god, I very much dislike that film.
Well, but it speaks to this movie to some degree, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like you don't remember the characters' names, and it's not, it's more of a ride, and
right,
and there's nothing actually, I mean, movies can be immersive, and that people, it's a different kind of experience, but I don't have anything against a movie being kind of a ride, so to speak, where you're just kind of moving along with it on the filmmaker's terms. But if you're asked to then pick it apart for, like, you guys were alluding to some more nuance and stuff like that, it becomes a little difficult and it becomes a little kind of boring,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, the what you said right there is the thing that kept popping into my mind on the rewatch was, this feels like a ride.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm at Universal Studios and I'm on a little tram, and I'm on the end of the world or America 2027 ride, and everything's falling apart, and there's bombs going off, and there's protesters, and there's smog, and you're kind of strapped in.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, like, in that situation, the protagonist is a little bit kind of sidelined because the camera's kind of the protagonist at that point, right?
Yep.
And I definitely got that feeling with this, but I can't, before I go on, I feel like we're being a little bit negative on the film. And I have to say, before we go further down that perilous path, what works here, I think, with the cinematography and what Cuarón was doing, the world building here is amazing.
Yes.
Like, I think the world building in terms of the detail and the layered sort of,
and the cast is really good.
Yeah.
Yes. They get some really clunker lines, but they sell them. And I mean, Clive Owen's whatever. But
how is Clive Owen whatever? He's perfect.
No, I mean, yeah, you're going for an Avatar. You're going for like over the shoulder, like first person shooter kind of stand-in.
This was all handheld, right? That's what
handheld or gimbal.
Cam 3X is gimbal, handheld camera.
Yeah,
they made something for the one shot. I think they contacted somebody else to do that scene with them, and then like they invented something just for that scene called the doggy cam, I think.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. So there's
nice and low. Yeah,
the technical achievement here is like next to none.
Yeah, and I mean it still hits so hard, just like viscerally. when the blood splatters on the lens and we
I
keep
noticed
going with
that too,
it.
actually, this second rewatch, I was like, oh, okay, there, and then they have to roll with it because they can't.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so some of the staging too. It just for whatever reason, I took note that there were so many animals in this show.
Mhm.
Because I think that despite the fact that humans can't procreate, I think animals still can because there are a lot of animals still alive.
Mhm.
And
Right.
you see a lot of dead cows, and that was probably like mad cow disease or something like that. And then, but everybody's got cats and dogs. And then there's like this herd of sheep that walk across in one shot. And, it's during one of these action shots. And I'm just like, well, that took a lot of, it takes a lot to wrangle some of these animals and make them do what you want, and then
Yeah.
you have explosions and gunshots. And so like just the logistics of, and all the people and all the background and everything like that. And it really is still very, very impressive to watch even to this day. So I think we probably all agree that the movie holds up as in that regard.
Well, there's a second one shot too in the refugee camp, which I think is actually way more impressive.
I like the car part actually. I
like the car part is cool, but
short.
The car part is cool, but you feel like this is a one shot thing.
It
has calls attention to itself.
Yeah. The part in the refugee where it's the refugee camp where it's like a rolling battle.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. And it was like, obviously took a lot from Saving Private Ryan, probably all from Saving Private Ryan.
I got that feeling when I was watching it, at least.
Yeah. 100%. And, well, let's talk about Gravity just briefly. Because I have to.
You promise, Dan, it's going to be brief?
Yeah. I'm setting the timer. What do you want to say, Dan, about that?
Right.
Well, because I think it speaks to something about this film and where it's almost like Children of Men was this branch for Cuarón, right? Like he had this path that he could go on. Children of Men was kind of a financial not so great. He turned down the second Harry Potter movie to do this, right? To do Children of Men. So it was a big choice to make. Then he does Gravity. And like, do you guys remember when Gravity came out, the hype? Like talk about hype among like, film nerds.
Stupid off the charts.
It was off the charts. I had to go like opening weekend and like it was all these, film nerds and like just geeking out about it. And afterwards, I remember being in a lobby.
3D glasses.
Too. Exactly. Yeah. I was in the lobby sort of like, and they were just like gushing over it. And I'm like, yeah, man, that movie sucked.
It was bad.
Like, and it didn't suck from a technical perspective. Again, amazing to some degree.
But way more forgettable somehow.
Completely forgettable because technological sort of sheen needs a good story at its core as a skeleton.
Yes. Yeah. Especially when it's all chroma keyed, right? It's like you're going to have this, one woman show. Like at the very least, Children of Men didn't attempt to, like they filled, like I said, the cast, they filled out those scenes with Michael Caine, Julianne Moore, Chiwetel Ejiofor, and so like you've got like the pins ready to knock down there, and then Gravity, you've got George Clooney kind of, and it's like
George
Clooney pretending to be Frank Sinatra or something.
Right.
What's going on?
It's just like so. It's like emotionally inert because there's nothing there. And I mean, I'm not gonna say too much bad about Sandra, but like I don't think she could. I don't know why anybody thought she could do that. Like,
she doesn't have the chops.
Yeah,
she couldn't do it. I don't know if anybody could. It's not that I'm saying that. I shouldn't.
You were just watching Sandra Bullock kind of in the movie. You weren't watching her character. You were watching Sandra deal with it. Yeah. I mean, again, the less we talk about Gravity, the
what about Roma?
I do take Dan's point about kind of the comparison and the differences in the approach to world building and story. Although I will say that I was surprised in the credits they credited 5 people with the screenplay in this.
I saw that,
and
that's a lot.
That doesn't make sense to me, but I don't know if anybody's got any more notes on that. But it just
Ryan, you're the expert in the movie making here. Like, how many people normally write a script?
Well, obviously every movie is different. There's always the famous story about like Armageddon, how like 15 people worked on that in the life of its project. Obviously, with a big studio movie, sometimes you'll have, one person kind of started and then a number of people come in and script doctor it and take a.
But they usually don't all get credits though, right?
Right.
Well, it's obviously the Writers Guild has a big say in how all that allocated, and there are pretty, there are a lot of rules that basically that in terms of crediting, and I don't pretend to understand them all, but it's the screenplay. It's not the story by, it's the screenplay. So these people, 5 people put stuff, character names and dialogue in there somewhere. Although in this movie, I'd be interested to know how much dialogue there actually was, because most of it is just kind of this ride, and so they're Although I don't feel that it's without scenes and actors talking to each other and stuff's going on there.
So I'm finding a deep dive on Vulture that kind of helps break it down, and because I was trying to parse it out myself just by looking at the filmographies of these non-Cuarón people with the writing credits. So Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby were a writing team. I guess they're still active. They had just done like a couple of really forgettable films that never really got much of any kind of wide release, and their pitch went across Cuarón's desk, and it was very much like a legit actual treatment of the 92 novel. But then that, based on the trivia that you provided, Dan, it seems like what perhaps happened is that Cuarón heard that concept. There's a quote in this Vulture article where it seemed like after Y Tu Mama Tambien and had blown up, and Cuarón had the pick of the litter, so to speak. He says, script after disappointing script was tossed my way. It got to the point where I just told my agent to send me summaries because reading Hollywood screenplays is really sad. So he probably got, that's probably why, he got the idea of like, okay, we'll credit these 2 guys for, sending this pitch my way, but we're going to do it my way. And so then his writing partner at the time was Timothy J. Sexton, who had really done just TV movies and one Mexican feature prior to this. But with the help of, I don't know how David Arata comes into play, but I did notice that he was kind of a hired hand for producer Ian Smith for Spy Game, the Robert Redford Brad Pitt debacle in 2001.
Yes.
So pretty strong.
So my guess, you've got the Fergus and Ostby treatment. Arata adds more of the war and political intrigue element, and then Cuarón and Sexton add their clunky bullshit.
Here's a question about that then. Like, do we feel like this is a well-written movie? I could see it both ways. I mean, I could see it kind of what Ryan was saying before. It's a ride.
On the rewatch, I kind of started to write down a few of the plot holes that were kind of coming my way.
What do you got for us? Give me something.
It's just like, first of all, they don't go to great lengths to explain relationships to characters. It's like Michael Caine's in the movie, but I'm not quite sure how he came so much into Clive Owen's orbit. They don't really.
Yeah. Is Clive Owen a journalist?
He's a former activist, according to the blurb that Dan.
What is this job that he gets out of?
Well, it reminds me a lot of Winston in 1984, right?
Kind of like he works. I think he works for the government.
Is he like erasing people? No.
They ask him for traveling papers or something, and then they have that weird thing with like Danny Houston. Playing his brother, cousin. Yeah, and
I love that scene.
I mean,
it's so bizarre.
The David sculpture and Chuck Bass from Gossip Girl.
And there's something with the pig that's like an album cover or something. Pig
Floyd.
Yeah.
I mean, but like, okay, and then Julianne Moore, who plays his ex-wife, like, and they had a child together, but they really don't. Again, I don't know necessarily how these people meet. I don't know how they knew about Jasper's the terrorists come to Jasper's hiding place.
That's the one thing I didn't understand,
and that doesn't make
How do they find them?
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, they said like he was here a couple weeks ago, and then how do you know that? Did
how would you know
Moore
that?
spill the beans or something? Like, and then they kind of explain. The people. I guess Julianne Moore wasn't hardcore or extremist enough for them.
That was also not explained very well why she was murdered.
Well,
Right.
I'm not. I won't go as far as saying the movie is badly written, because I don't think it. I mean, it makes it's. I don't know. It's just
there's a lot worse.
There's
a ton worse, and like
for all it kind of squanders some of the world building, because the visually, I guess visually it tells you more than the screenplay does. Visually, it tells you a lot of stuff, about what's going on and how they're, there's a lot of pollution. There's a lot of, I remember the cows burning in the fields. I remember, some of the advertisements around about how it's to refuse
graffiti,
to refuse like fertility tests, it's a crime now. And then there's a propaganda on the bus saying how the whole world is collapsed, but Britain's how is the only. I mean,
the suicide pills,
knowing what
I thought that was great.
Suicide pills get a lot of play in the show. They're very deliberate in setting up that part of the.
And it's constant. It's like you get the TV ads, you get the,
it's just like, I think Britain would be the first to collapse if the,
Yeah, look at Brexit. They don't even have food in the shelves.
Won't be seen, but I mean, I guess at the time they were seen as a little more stable than the rest of the world. But anyways, what I'm saying is that visually it tells you a lot more than the screenplay does.
Right. And I think there's like an attempt anyways, and I don't think it's super successful, especially on a rewatch 15 years later. And I think it's also, a big screen versus small screen thing too, perhaps, where so much of that visual kind of commands everything that's like stimulus in the movie watcher's senses, and so you're able to forgive a lot of those like details. And then there's also perhaps the argument to be made that they're attempting a kind of like shorthand of like dropping you into the world and not getting overly concerned with expositional details, but it still doesn't, like, it feels like that's kind of like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Like, we're just trying to make sure we're not doing too much table setting, but at the same time it's like, well, if it's going to be distracting to me upon rewatches, it's like how what are the legs actually of a film like this? Which is kind of interesting because, like, still, with anniversary pieces like this Vulture deep dive is like still calling it a dystopian masterpiece.
There's a lot of those pieces. One of the main sources here for notes is a 10-year anniversary piece where Cuarón does this really in length interview about it. And so this movie just keeps coming back over and over again. But it does. The question, like, I'm sort of left with on the rewatch as a movie that I loved when it came out. Like, I was obsessed with this movie. It has faded for me over the years because it feels so indebted to a very specific time period. Not only in my life, but in like, American history and UK history and all that kind of stuff. But I think, the fact that it does feel a little bit more like a theme park ride, which Gravity certainly copied, right? That was an extension of this feeling of sort of
Gravity is just a ride. That's all.
It's just a theme park ride, right? And like, remember, what's the story in Gravity?
There is,
and this is the thing that, again, going back to Gravity, it's going to blow. Like, why does she go back to Earth? Her kid's dead. What does she care? You know what I mean? Like
because gravity brings her back to, I don't know, man.
Exactly. There's no sort of, and I think here, ultimately, it's not a script that you would study in screenwriting class.
Right.
It's not Chinatown. It's not even remotely in that realm, because the storytelling is so visual. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of how important that part of storytelling is. Mm-hmm. Is that you have to think below the surface of the characters, not only what their motivations are, what they really want. Do we know what Clive Owen wants?
No. Yeah. Why is he?
He kind of he kind of gets trapped into this because once it all goes bad at the car, and they have all these CCT, these closed circuit cameras and surveillance.
Yeah,
he's doomed because they have him on camera and he's been photographed with like 4 other terrorists or whatever, and so he's got no choice at that point. He can't just walk away. He's kind of
Clive Owen was like me at the hour mark of gravity. That's what I felt.
No, that's an interesting read, Ryan, because I think that for me, I also got a different kind of version of why, like, seeing it in my 20s in grad school, I definitely felt like it was just like this very pure, almost like borderline corny, like just save the world kind of thing, right? But then you watch it with fresh eyes, maybe more jaded eyes, 15 years later, and I'm like, yeah, this guy's he's just like, I don't know. There's just seems to be like a compulsion that is because he's out of options, because there's no other real thing for him to do. So he might as well use whatever knowledge and skills he apparently has from his life as an activist / journalist / friend of a political cartoonist. I don't know. Like, it all feels kind of wishy-washy, but because it's sold, I do want to make special mention of John Tavener's score, which is like borderline saccharine, but also
I was going to bring that up. I did not really enjoy it too much.
Yeah, it's like, but
for
it's
a movie that's, sorry to interrupt, for a movie that looks like so well made and stuff like that, the score was kind of an afterthought, it seemed to me. But
yeah,
go on.
And it was also like, I think really much a part and parcel once again of that time period, like all the the operatic choral stuff that was happening in action movies.
Time period for that,
right? So I don't know. It just seems like very much.
It would swell at weird times, and then the action part of the score was pretty blasé and stuff like that. I'm just disappointed because technically and craft wise the movie's standards, and that kind of takes you out of it. It's just kind of like you said, you would have expected that from maybe mid 2000s products, that was kind of what was popular and what was accepted as kind of arty, but it does not age well.
Exactly.
What do we make of, in this 10-year review, they go in depth with the producers and people on the set, and there's numerous stories about how Cuarón was incredibly difficult to work with on this movie. The quote, in very troubled production, he would say stuff like, if you guys don't get it right, I'm not shooting it. He literally had one scene or one story starts jumping on cars to damage them because they weren't damaged the right way that he wanted to. One of the producers says it was a very tempestuous experience. Do we feel like, does that come through in the movie at all? I think the perfectionism does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it feels like every single inch of this movie is thought over. Like, I'm thinking like the visual, think about the first 5 minutes of this movie. And it's almost like, you wouldn't teach it necessarily in screenwriting class, but you would teach it in film class.
Right.
Because it's like it's so immersive. And it feels more like a video game. I feel like I'm playing like Half-Life back in the day. Like you said, a first person shooter where it's like, yeah, you're there, you're feeling it. Doesn't necessarily translate to like a great story or maybe longevity in that department. But what do we make of the stories of a troubled production and like hiding money too? That they were hiding money from Universal or the production studios about how much they were spending.
Right. I think, I'd be curious to hear from you, Ryan, as a guy that writes the paychecks. What, how big of a deal is this? Because for me as an outsider, like, especially once again looking at the time period, 2000s, that's also when like David O. Russell was doing his thing, being a straight up abuser on set.
Right.
What's going on?
I actually had not heard. It was interesting that there is an article about kind of some behind the scenes chaos there, because I'd not heard that connected with this movie at all, and I don't know if there are any stories since on his future on his other movies of it. But I can kind of understand with a movie that demands so much precision, you're going to get real frazzled. Because imagine how many takes they have to do of some of that stuff, and one little thing goes wrong, and it could be something as simple as something wandering across frame that's not supposed to do that. And so I imagine that the responsibilities of everybody involved to basically be in sync with each other was very great, and I think it was. I can see why he would be, kind of on edge during the whole show, because again, he had a lot riding on getting everything to go right all the time, basically. In terms of hiding money, it's weird. This kind of goes back to what you guys were saying about how the film was made, because it sounds like it. I don't know if it had studio backing to start with or if they bought it later. But obviously, if you're a big studio movie, you have people visiting set, semi-frequently, and you have the books being sent back to the company, on, a daily basis, So
the studio would be checking numbers on a daily basis.
Especially with a movie that's budgeted at, $70+ million. Yeah. They're going to know if you're starting to overspend, and they're going to get more hands-on, and and then that's probably what obviously the director didn't want, is he didn't want a suit coming up to him and tapping him on the shoulder during this really probably stressful movie to make. This is a stressful movie to make. That's all there is to it. But that's kind of my take on it, is just that, they didn't want people in their business, and so it sounds like they started to hide stuff from them, which is not a good idea. But no. The movie got made, and it was at least probably a critical success, and it made a lot of people. It made it onto a lot of people's resumes, where they're like, "Oh, I worked on Children of Men," and that got them work on other stuff.
Well, it's like a film nerd's film,
yeah,
right? It's one of those movies that, like, if you're into this stuff, you're going to know about it and probably like it and have seen it a few times. And I imagine that definitely helps with getting new work. I mean, this led to Gravity, after all. How far was... I can't stop.
God damn it, Danny.
Gravity was 7 years after this, by the way. What happened?
It feels like there was a bigger gap between the two films, but that just happens when you get old.
I mean, 7 years is a long time, though, for a filmmaker.
Well, and it's that Gravity was more approachable because it wasn't such a bummer. It's like... it kind of like, people probably didn't want to really. I've only seen now Children of Men twice, and I don't think I'll be watching it again for quite some time. But I mean, people, Gravity's like a Titanic movie. It's like you go and see it with friends, and the friends that you didn't see it with, you're like, well, I'll go see it again with you guys, because you want to. It's a ride, so you want to experience it with other people.
Yeah, it's like going to a theme park. I mean, it is interesting to see, like, look at the critical, and as we talk about it, I think it's funny because I think we all have a, it's a level-headed, but I think critical take on the film.
Yeah,
that's not the norm.
No,
the norm here is absolute praise.
We're the outliers here, the way we're kind of picking.
Yeah, I mean, here's where it gets fascinating. You look at the critical stuff. Like, all critic scores a 92% Rotten Tomatoes, 84 on Metacritic, which is very high. I think the one that stands out to me here in terms of audience reaction is 84 on Letterboxd. Like, if you're above 80 on Letterboxd from, like, film aficionados and whatever, I list it as God tier. Mm-hmm. Like, that's like Godfather level, Dark Knight level film.
I might be mistaken, but I don't think we've done a movie on this podcast yet until now that had above 80 on Letterboxd.
I don't think so.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was super high. And then, but I also find there's like weirdness to, like, the cinema score, which, if you're not familiar, is the survey that's done opening night. I think it's the Friday 7:00 show in like 12 different cities in the country. It's been going on since like the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Got a B+, which is not good. That's very bad.
I always get confused on cinema score, because like a B-, like, in terms of a grade, is actually not that bad in like academics, but cinema score, it's like terrible.
It's pretty bad. Like, if you're below a B+, you're in a rough spot, and you're not a horror movie. Wow, you're like, B- is terrible. So there is a weird sort of immediate softness to this for people who went out opening night. These are not Johnny come latelys.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so what do you guys think? Is there anything in there, and sort of what we're talking about is, maybe was there a letdown here? Was there a mismarketing, as you guys recall?
I mean, it just seems like a strange movie to put out wide.
Yes. Yeah.
Why? I feel like they're probably, but also like if you're going to spend that much money making it, I guess you gotta double down, right? Would this movie
They got to
have-
cover costs, yeah. Because if
Yeah,
they knew going in it was $76 million, right? That's a lot of cash. You're going to lay down what, another 30, 40 for marketing at least.
Right. Would anybody have attempted to make this if they had to make it on less than 20? I don't know. Probably not.
Well, I do wonder what was greenlit. Ryan, do you think that this thing was ballooned?
I don't know. It's tough to say because one of the other things that I noticed when my rewatch is they probably built this whole town for the end of the refugee camp.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Like that Saving Private Ryan level type of stuff where they build these towns and then they blow them to smithereens and then you have to reset it and all that stuff. And that, I don't know. I mean, because the rest of the story is relatively, it's pretty, the locations are somewhat pastoral and like, they kind of don't have a lot of people in a lot of scenes for most of it. No. If this whole kind of second half of the movie where they're in the refugee camp is written on the script, you got to imagine that when they budgeted it, they couldn't really underestimate that. I figured like you have to, I don't know, but you can't do this movie for like under 50 million probably, right?
Yeah, you can't.
Probably not. Not with the sort of the production design that they decided to use here. I mean, it's pretty elaborate and layered. Do we feel like, I'm kind of looking at these like critical reactions we have listed here. It's very hard. Like Kenneth Turner at the LA Times said, it's a Blade Runner for the 21st century.
Well,
a worthy successor to that epic of dystopian decay. Okay, very positive.
Kenneth.
Well, that's
an
old statement to make.
Is he wrong though?
Well,
I mean, like outside of this group of three people, yeah, I mean, it seems like
probably right.
The film nerds have proved him correct.
Yeah, they love it. I mean, on Reddit, you can't go a week without someone saying, "I just saw Children of Men, it changed my life."
But what he unfortunately could not realize at the time is that the Blade Runner for the 21st century would actually turn out to be Blade Runner 2049.
Don't say. I knew you were going to say it. Well, that leads me. How do we? I'm going to throw a curveball at you guys. Think of dystopian films. Obviously, this is on the upper echelon as people see it, the sort of general consensus. How would you relate this to something, say, like 28 Days Later, which came out 3 years before, technically 4 in the UK? Mm-hmm. Different themes, but a dystopian theme that's a little bit more sort of George Romero-esque. How do you feel like this movie stacks up to that movie? Because I think we all loved that movie back in the day. We had a formal debate about it, as I recall.
I think it was on. I think HBO Max actually had 28 Days Later on it recently, and I watched the whole film again for the first time in a couple years, and still really dig that movie.
Still swings away. It just rocks.
I mean, I saw that movie like 3 times in the theater. That's where I dread. If one of my friends hadn't seen it, I'm like, we're going right now. Let's go. I can see that movie again, and I still think it holds up pretty well. I
haven't seen it in a few years.
I think it's an absolute masterpiece.
I think that I liked. I think that the script is stronger in the sense that
way stronger.
It also benefits for the fact that the cast isn't so big because most everybody is dead. So they kind of are able to show kind of characters kind of giving each other a boost to try to get through this really difficult situation, and then the villains are given a little bit more room to wiggle in the end. It's still not that deep of a movie, of course, because it's basically a zombie movie, but I don't know. I guess 20. You could say though that 28 Days Later is a ride as well.
I would say that, but it doesn't have the same feeling as this movie.
No.
I think you who's the main character? Jim, is that his name in the movie?
Cillian Murphy, I feel like is definitely light years beyond Clive Owen, just in terms of like people able to bring that kind of everyman role to life in a nuanced way.
Well, they talk about their emotions in that movie, right? There's like scenes where they talk about what they want and the wife that they miss and the family that's gone.
Brendan
Do we
Gleeson,
really
oh my
hear
God.
that?
Brendan Gleeson's great as always. Yeah.
You know what we get in this movie, and I'm shitting on this movie for no reason. I love this movie. There, you know, the emotional context. There's that scene. The one thing that stood out to me is there's this scene where he, in the beginning, where she's trying to make contact with him, whatever. They're on the bus, and he says something. I can't believe you could forget our son so
They had
easily.
that fight in the upper. Yeah, that was the fight. In the upper, they had that fight on the upper deck of the bus.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it just kind of it falls flat a little bit to me because I know that people can blow up at each other at the drop of a hat, especially that history there. But for whatever reason, the way it was staged, it was just like, okay, we're having a bad fight.
And he literally says something like, "Do what you do best, walk away."
Yeah, I was like, what?
It's like fucking. I did want to say that one movie that came to mind that I don't think I had seen. I don't think I'd seen Children of Men all the way through since I've seen this movie multiple times. It's one of my favorites of the past decade, and I don't know if I'm saying this amongst people that will scoff at me. I don't care. It feels like a ride, and the emotions feel real, the stakes feel real, and it actually has a sense of fun to it. Snowpiercer.
Okay.
Not the TV show, the movie.
Yeah.
I love that film, and I think that that's a movie that does that amusement park style well, but doesn't forget to actually make it joyous and also bloody as hell.
Yeah. Okay. I could see that. That's a really good call and a good take.
Well, you know, there was it's interesting that you brought up Snowpiercer because Snowpiercer exists, of course, as a movie and a show, right?
Mm-hmm.
I recently was watching Why the Last Man.
Oh yeah,
okay.
well, I read the comics.
So,
I haven't seen the show yet.
So, and that, you know, obviously kind of flips the fertility thing a little bit because all the dudes are dead. And I was just kind of like, what can they? It got me thinking just in this conversation, like, what does a Children of Men TV show look like? If
it looks amazing.
Do you make a TV show out of this thing? Or
you could. I mean, think about the first 10 minutes of it as a TV show world that it's built.
But
like
I guess,
you know,
so
it could end up like Man in the High Castle, though. Snooze alert.
So again, going to something like Why the Last Man, I watched the first season of that show, and I kind of did not dig it. I think that it was
that's why I've been avoiding it, is because I liked the comics so much.
It shares some of the themes, you know, with Children of Men in the sense that, you know, it's just kind of like one hope for humanity kind of navigating a world that's falling apart. And the first couple episodes were good, and then the show kind of falls apart and you're over it. And I think that, you know, I'm watching Children of Men and it's not quite the same progression, but it's just kind of like, okay, well, the concept is something that's really, you know, interesting, and, you know, building the world certainly is successful. But then at the end of the day, it's just kind of such a bummer to go down this road. And I'm just not sure that, you know, that's probably why I'm ragging on it a little bit, just because it's not really a world I want to revisit very often, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely a low rewatch outside the technical aspects of it, I think.
Yeah.
What do we think? You know, Chris, what do you think the legacy of this film's going to be? Because that's one of the main points we always want to hit with these sort of rewind reviews. Because it's such a big film. Now, and it was back then for a certain group of people, but now it's, you know, its cachet is much larger than it was then. How do you see this playing out, you know, in 20, 30 years?
Well, I mean, it got me to think about looking at Letterboxd's 250 highest rated films.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like the, you know, insular erudite version of the IMDb 250, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you're more hard pressed to find the kind of films that like populate the top 250 of the IMDb that just seem like, oh, that'll be up there for a little while and then it'll disappear.
Yeah.
You don't see that as much on the Letterboxd because it's definitely more canonical and also more leans more obscure and international.
Mhm.
But like, I mean, I'm going to throw out a parallel. I don't know how well this movie's going to play still in another 10 years, similar to how I see Damien Chazelle's Whiplash in the top 50 of Letterboxd. And that's a film that I actually like. But
Yeah.
I cannot see that movie still causing so much like masturbatory
Why
praise
though? Why?
in 10-15 years. Because it's like it's one of those things where it's like it's a well-acted movie that does something different, but there's not a lot there.
It's
But
also kind of like, does it glorify abuse? Or no?
Well, yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's not cool anymore.
Right. But like, yeah, so I just think that maybe we're just like, there's an extended honeymoon phase. I think eventually people will realize, I think especially to be curious to see in response to whatever Cuarón does next.
Yeah.
Because obviously Roma hit a lot of, checked a lot of the indie artsy boxes too.
That's why I love Roma.
I actually liked Roma. But
the scene in the ocean's absurd and over the top. I mean, come on.
yeah, I mean, it's melodrama.
Yeah.
But I do not. That's my theory is that we're still liking Children of Men for a while, but it'll eventually fade.
I don't think it'll fade because of the technical aspects. I think it will fade, like you're saying, because of the political naivete of it. It comes across as very much like an episode of The Daily Show in 2006. It's sort of this neoliberal, self-righteous, solipsistic, I know better, the world should be this way. And as we've seen the world play out, especially in America, that's not going to win out. Just not. And so, I don't know. When we look back on this movie, I think we'll see it as kind of childish. But that's just my take.
Childish, that's apropos.
Yes. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Ryan, any closing thoughts as our guest here? You have the honors here. Any closing thoughts on?
I think I'm coming down on your side of the, what the legacy of this movie is. I think, obviously people will still watch certain segments of it, just to see those cool scenes, but that's pretty much it. I think it's rare that anybody actually picks this thing up and watches the whole thing all the way through. As we get further from some of the historical events, like Abu Ghraib was a big thing.
Yes,
huge. The Second Iraq War, refugee crisis, and immigration are still very much big issues with us. So those, the anti-immigrant rhetoric from some of the characters in the movie, that's still kind of is relevant, and I would actually argue sometimes it's even worse than what was on the film. But
way worse.
Yeah. So I think in that respect, actually, especially and the climate stuff too, which I think was a little bit. They rightly probably didn't draw too much attention to this, but I think the movie basically says that because we fucked up the earth, we can't have babies anymore. Exactly, I think that was kind of the idea, because they really layer at least the imagery of, how polluted and gross and gray everything is. And so I don't know. I mean, I think, will it stay in like maybe the top 250? Probably for in the next 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd see that. I think it might slowly fade.
Like I said, I agree with you guys. I think it'll just kind of slowly kind of inch down that list and kind of because somebody will do a big technical movie like this again, and and there'll always be something. I mean, Gravity probably obviously more people saw Gravity than this show, so it's so yeah.
Gotcha. All right, interesting. I mean, I saw it interesting, like the Abu Ghraib stuff. It's like we thought that was so bad, but like we put kids in cages,
right?
And nobody blinked an eye, or half the country didn't blink an eye at it. And I'm like, okay, we know where this is all leading. Let's be honest. On that depressing note, Ryan, thanks for being here with us. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you guys.
We'll have you back definitely next season. And then Chris, what are we doing next week? We got a new movie.
I'm picking the new movies this season. Let's look forward to talking about the new indie semi-apocalyptic thriller, where I guess is a mystery as to whether or not the world has ended in We Need to Do Something. It stars Sierra McCormick and Vanessa Shaw. It's directed by Sean King O'Grady. It's his directorial full-length debut, but he was more of an executive producer before this, and he helped make one of my favorite movies of 2019, The Assistant. It's
Ooh,
We Need to Do Something, streaming on Hulu. Should be an interesting watch.
awesome. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.